Dwayne had to go now. His planet needed him. Or so he says. I really don't care. Today we're venturing back to the Nintendo Switch online service of classic games to play a game that never saw a light of day around these parts, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure on whether we missed out on anything. Today's subject matter is the formerly Japanese exclusive Psycho Dream, side-scrolling action game released in 1992 for the Super Famicom courtesy of Riot and Telenet. In Psycho Dream, you have two characters to choose from. Rio, a red and white garbed fellow with a sword thing of sorts, or Maria, a slightly less garbed lady with a whip thing of sorts. Each character obviously plays somewhat differently from each other due to their choice of arms, but otherwise the game plays out the same way. You have 6 levels, or tracks as the game calls it, to get through, divided up into several chapters which serve as your checkpoints, and it's pretty standard side-scrolling fare. You move to the right, you fight some enemies, sometimes you'll have stationary elevator segments to contend with, and eventually you'll come across a boss that you'll have to overcome. And the boss encounters are certainly enough to keep you on your toes if the constant spawning of enemies don't do it for you. By default, your character moves fairly slowly, but holding down the L or R buttons will allow your character to run, which is useful for attaining higher jumps to reach higher platforms, which you might need to do a couple times in the game. You also have a limited number of screen nukes that can clear some enemies or damage a boss, and you can collect crystals to power up your main attack until you eventually reach your ultimate power, but take one too many hits and you'll be reduced back to starting strength, thus forcing you to build back your power again, which I would recommend as soon as possible because your basic attacks are woefully inadequate for the task at hand. Other than that though, there's not much else to the game. The premise of Psycho Dream, agents entering a virtual world to rescue teenagers from being part of this virtual world inhabited by strange demon creatures and such. You know, it sounds intriguing on paper, but the game itself doesn't really do much with the concept beyond just having a bunch of weird-looking enemies tossed your way. It's a pretty standard side-scrolling action game that's almost Castlevania-esque in its setup. You have similar-looking life bars, slow methodical movement, and there's even a whip in there, but the level design is somewhat bare bones. Minimal platforming, mostly enemies being tossed your way every so often. Pray you get enough crystals to increase your attack power or restore your health when needed because it doesn't regenerate between stages. I mean, once you reach a point where your character is practically spamming lasers all over the place, it almost becomes a cakewalk until you get cocky and take one too many hits, which strips you down to basic power, and now things get a bit hectic because your basic attack simply isn't worth a damn. That almost contributes to the unevenness of Psycho Dream. Sometimes you have fun moments like some of the boss fights, which can be pretty hectic, and other times you have the slow-moving elevator bits. That seemingly keep going until you figure out that you're supposed to kill all the mounds of dirt things on screen before moving on to the next segment, which you're given no indication of that being what you're supposed to do here. Psycho Dream can be straightforward most of the times, but those few instances where it decides not to be... Psycho Dream only gives you one life before a game over, but you do have unlimited continues and there are checkpoints to respawn from, so it's not completely merciless. Control for the most part feels responsive. There's a sluggishness to the way your character moves, but holding the L or R button to run sort of alleviates that a bit. It's largely functional, doesn't harm the overall experience, not that there was much to harm in the first place. Psycho Dream is a fairly decent looking game, but nothing that really pushes the hardware. Granted, you have some creative looking bosses to contend with and they're all eerie looking, but you've got some basic looking scenery, your characters are on the smaller side of things, and really, it's pretty average visual fare overall. Sadly, whenever there's too much going on, the game does suffer from bouts of slowdown, and it's not just a slight reduction in speed. This thing is known to chug rather heavily, and I was almost afraid that it would start to fall apart at times. Fortunately, it never did. All that said, I do like that you have a reflection on the glass or mirrors and things of that nature. That's a bit of a nice touch, but other than that, it looks fine. Now, if there is one aspect that truly leans into the surreal aspect of Psycho Dream, it's the soundtrack, which is eerily somber, unsettling, suitably mysterious and haunting, and most of it just sounds the same anyway. I'm not going to say that the music is bad, it's fine for the most part and does its best to complement the world that Psycho Dreams presents, but after a while it just sort of becomes background noise that fades into the background. Sound effects are just there, nothing stand out or anything. They exist, they provide some audible complement to the background music, not much else to say there. Riveting commentary, I'm sure. Sometimes you just have nothing to say. So you just say words and hope somebody gets something out of it, and if not, not much I could do there, really. Psycho Dream seems like a somewhat intriguing game on paper, but ultimately comes across as a pretty average side-scrolling action game. It's got some neat moments, there's some fun boss battles, and you've got two characters that play differently enough to try out. Other than that, it's pretty standard fare that you'll probably play once or twice before you move on to something else without giving it another thought. It's a game that does what it does well enough, but could have been a touch more.